Did Timothy have previous experience playing guitar at all prior to you hooking up with him?
Almost almost nothing. He knew one or two chords. He came over to my place and we sat down across from each other with two guitars, and I said, show me what you know, if anything. And he kind of, I don't specifically remember, but like kind of an E minor or something else, like more a half-baked C maybe, and that was it.
Today, I'm talking to somebody who has had not only a wonderful career as a touring guitarist for all kinds of people, including Paul Simon, and I've just learned of Blue Nile, Glasgow's own. He's also been teaching some interesting people how to play the guitar. I'm talking to Larry Saltzman, and how are you, Larry?
And well, thank you.
Now, Larry has been teaching Timothy Chalamet how to be, musically at least. Bob Dylan is in the new James Mangold movie, A Complete Unknown. And I want to know all about that. How did you end up being someone who teaches these celebrities how to play guitar?
It started for me actually about 10 years ago. There was a movie called Ricky and the Flash. That movie was made by the director Jonathan Demme, a very prominent guy who's unfortunately no longer with us, but he did Silence of the Lambs, et cetera, et cetera. And an actress called Meryl Streep was one of the stars of that movie. And somebody thought that, Meryl needed, Meryl played like a rocker in this film. Sort of like, it was a contemporary film that, was taking place 2015, 10 years ago. But it was a band that had existed sort of from the 80s. So she was like kind of like Joan Jett kind of vibe. And long story short, somebody thought that I would be a good instructor for her. So I would say there was a bit of luck involved. So somebody that knew her, basically, she had put out a feeler who could teach me to play some rock and roll guitar for this movie. And luckily, my name came into their head, and I taught Meryl Streep that. It was very kind of beautiful and intense experience, like 10 lessons with Meryl, 3-hour lessons, nose to nose, teaching her to be Chrissie Hynde and, really playing the songs, because people like that, they want to actually play. They don't want to fake it. So anyway, that got my foot in the door. And then from there were a succession of things, and it ultimately led to this wonderful phone call one day that said, are you available? As if I wouldn't be, to teach Timothy Chalamet how to play guitar like Bob Dylan for this movie.
Fantastic. Prior to us talking today, I didn't realize about the Jonathan Demme link, and Silence of the Lambs is one of my favorite movies. But also, anybody watching this should also know that he was the director of the Talking Heads Stop Making Sense live. But everyone's seen that, and it's incredible. So good start, Larry. Well done.
No, it's a total. It was I say I lucked into it. I mean, there's a great quote about luck. I don't know exactly what it is, but luck is some combination of being prepared and blah 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 blah.
Sure.
But the thing about Jonathan Demme, correctly, absolutely, Talking Heads. He was a real music guy. And I think he also worked with Neil. He did work with Neil Young on a documentary, and Jim Mangold, who did Complete Unknown, also a real music guy. So my conversations with the directors in the very beginning, which were not that extensive but really crucial, told me everything kind of that I needed to know about them, and they were both fantastic people to work with from my end.
Did Timothy have previous experience playing guitar at all prior to you hooking up with him?
Almost nothing. He knew one or two chords. He came over to my place, and we sat down across from each other with two guitars, and I said, show me what you know, if anything. And he kind of, I don't specifically remember, but like kind of an E minor or something else, like more a half-baked C maybe, and that was it.
And how long did you actually get to spend with Timothy prior to him going in front of the cameras?
4.5 years, because originally we were meant to have 4 months. And that would have been a whole different situation. And, he's a super talented, hardworking guy. I guarantee that within the 4 months, which again was the original plan, he would have done, terrifically for 4 months. But first thing we started just before the COVID shutdowns happened in the States. So I'm referring to now November of 2019. So we got going, and then by March, everything was shut down. So now we kind of switched over to Zoom rather than in person. And between the fact that Jim Mangold was really busy, he did several movies. Timothy did several movies in the meantime. And I mean, basically, what happened is that when COVID restrictions were lifted and people could figure out how to work, these guys were already booked on other things. Timothy did Dune and Dune 2 and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Jim Mangold did Raiders of the Lost Ark. They're doing things they were committed to. However, both of these guys were totally dedicated to doing a complete unknown, and it was a real high priority for them. And anytime anything would be floated, like, wow, wonder if this movie's going to get made, they were both so optimistic. It's like, no, 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 we got to make this movie, and we have faith we're going to make it. And so I think this is the long answer to your question. We wound up having 4.5 years instead of 4 months.
I love the fact that Timothy went from being Bob Dylan to Paul Atreides to the Emperor of Arrakis to then back to being Bob Dylan again. Did you notice any difference between early Tim and then later on Tim?
Not really. He's just such a pro that it's hard for me to fathom what his acting world is really like. And yeah, he knows how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, totally, totally. Now, this movie, A Complete Unknown, is based on his more kind of like early years of his breakthrough, as far as I understand it. For me, as a guitar player, talking to you, a guitar player, Bob Dylan's quite an unusual guitarist, and he's quite an eccentric guitarist in terms of a lot of those acoustic troubadours back then. I'm wondering if you agree with this. For one thing, he had I don't want to call it an erratic style, but he would have his rhythms. He would go into these little flails and little flares and finessey parts and the little kind of almost Travis picked sort of little bits of melody and so on and so forth. And I wonder, is that something that was ever like on the cards to get to really nail the Bob Dylan way of playing, or is it more a case of just getting Timothy to be convincing as a guitarist?
No, it was specific to Dylan and very, very specific to Dylan. And I think that both Timothy, this was very much a collaboration between me and Timothy. And I don't know what to say. It's like, I know I'm being interviewed now, but honestly, and I really do like talking about this because it's a subject that's close to my heart more now than ever. But I mean, it's really all about the student in many ways, but also, we both, without even having to talk about it, both Timothy and myself and Jim understood the responsibility of getting the Dylan parts right. So we never actually did anything but that. And my first song by song, my instructions to Timothy were specifically what Dylan played on the recordings. Now, sometimes there was some latitude because we would refer to different versions. And as Bob is one of those guys where they say, never plays the same thing once, but it's not specifically true. Maybe I would say never plays the same thing twice, but sometimes we would hear different versions and have to negotiate. But in answer to your question, no, it was always very, very specifically what did Bob play on this recording? What did Bob play on this live performance? It was very much directed specifically to that.
Yeah, and given that he wasn't a guitarist prior to this in any great sort of manner, was replicating such a non-standard player, did that present challenges to Timothy, but also to you as a teacher?
In a way, not really, because like the good thing was that Tim was a blank slate at that point. So because he hadn't been playing more than what I described in the beginning, he didn't have like habits of other things that you had to maybe break him of. So we hit the ground running right away. I think the first song that we did was Masters of War. And what did we do? We listened. I mean, I explained to him in that song, just 2 or 3 chords were needed. I explained to him what they were. We listened to the record and just, as anybody would, I really referencing the record, you have to sort of, as go back and forth between here's the shape that happens in this hand and here's the strum that happens in this hand, and let's put it together. And the thing that Timothy did, though, from day one, and I think that this was brilliant, and I think that this also speaks to his even though he's very young, I think speaks to his experience as an actor. He also sang from the very downbeat. So sitting in my place here and literally E minor chord. He wasn't satisfied to just play the E minor chord to the D. He actually sang "Come Ye Masters of War." I didn't even have to, I might have advised him poorly and said, "Timothy, don't worry about the singing. We'll deal with that later." But I think he just knew holistically he had to do both.
That's really interesting, Larry, because one of my questions was going to be this integration. I know you had a vocal coach getting so you could deal with all that stuff, but it's the integration, it's adding those together because, of course, playing the guitar and learning the chords is one thing, but that's not performing like Bob Dylan. And so I wondered if that was going to be extra layer of difficulty or challenge, but you've said that right from the bat he was involved with that kind of simulation.
On every song, he never actually, and some of the are more difficult than others, but yeah, on every single song he hit the ground running, playing and singing. And sometimes I would have to slow him down a little bit and say, let's deal with the left hand for a second and let's deal with the right hand after that, blah blah blah. He was to get into the guitar weeds. He was really good with the left hand from day one, and I explained to him, well, you need to have kind of an arch your fingers so they don't mute the other strings and blah blah blah. And we know there's a lot of finesse in both hands, and I guess there's going to be a lot of guitar players watching this. But he absorbed all that stuff really quickly. Like very often when I was in the middle of trying to find the words to explain some kind of strum thing to him, as I was in the middle of explaining it, he was already like a step ahead of me doing it. And it's just, he's musical.
Do you know if Timothy's actually left-handed or right-handed?
I assume he's right-handed. Yeah, he must be. But we never actually. That would have been interesting. You couldn't be in the movie and play a lefty guitar, obviously.
Oh, of course, yeah.
But yeah, he's
you know how loads of left-handed players play right-handed. Like Eric Clapton and Billy Corgan and so on. That might have made his left hand, more efficient, but he's probably not.
Yeah, he's right-handed. Yeah.
Okay. This might come across as an odd question, but I think it's quite an interesting one. Playing guitar on screen versus playing a guitar in real life. The ultimate thing is that he has to look a certain way. What I'm really getting at is quite often when we're playing the guitars, it can quite often look like you're not doing as much as it sounds like you're doing. And so I wondered whether there was a way of being like a screen guitarist where maybe the left hand looks more obvious or the changes look more obvious in order to sell the idea better. Is that something that occurred?
We didn't specifically talk about that, and I'll tell you why. My theory: he's just like a really experienced actor, and I think he knows how to relate to a camera, the way we as guitar players probably know how to relate to a microphone when we're playing acoustic guitar or an amp or our pedals, we just know how to relate. And somebody might ask us that question, how do you relate to the microphone? It's like, well, we know the answer to that. And I think guy's very experienced. He knows how to relate to the camera. I was very impressed when I finally saw the movie, which was like a wild out of body experience for me because I had only dealt with Tim a lot one on one, face to face. So I wasn't, and I wasn't ever at the filming, and people ask me why, well, hey, Larry, why weren't you there? And I know the answer to it. The answer is by the time that he would show up on the day of to do any one of these songs, he had his act together. So the only reason you would need the guitar coach on the set would be like, get Larry over here. I forgot the D minor. Which is the D minor? But he wasn't operating on that level. He had the stuff nailed down. And that's why I wasn't at the filming. But I was very impressed in my humble little world, knowing nothing about acting, the way he related to the camera and just, again, I'm way above my pay grade now, but his facial expressions and the subtlety with which he acted. And in answer to your question, I think that went to the guitar playing as well. Again, it was just like he did a lot of study and he thought about this a lot, I'm sure. And I think he just knew how to relate to the camera as a guitar player and as an actor. One thing that we did do is that sometimes he was so, when we were working together, which is actually great. He was so forceful sometimes in his right hand, in his strumming, that I would have to say to him, you're it's fantastic. And his time was really good and his rhythm was really good. And he got the subtleties between different rhythms. But I would have to say to him, like, velocity wise or just dynamic or volume wise, you're at 110% and you really bring it back down to 90%. And then we would watch some archival thing of Bob. We didn't do a lot of this, but we would watch some archival thing of Bob, and we'd watch Bob's right hand, just again from this era that the film
Yeah.
was representing. There's a lot of stuff, obviously, just on YouTube or other stuff, and you would see that Bob was playing a little more gently than you would think. So I'd show that to Timothy, and he totally got that.
No, that leads me to one thing that I was interested in. Often when actors are acting their lines out, they'll have to go back into the studio later and do the kind of additional, basically re-record their lines because there might have been ambient noise outside or whatever. When it comes to performing the guitar parts, you happen to know if that was all re-recorded in a studio anyway, or whether those live takes that Timothy performed were the ones that are in the movie?
Yeah, the live takes are in the movie.
Oh, cool.
And Timothy specifically wanted to do that and fought for that. And I think on these kind of projects, I think for the music team and the music producer, I should say, it's probably a little easier if people will lip sync because then you have the consistency and et cetera. But Timothy very, very much firmly knew I'm going to be in the room, and I want this is the very first scene in the hospital room with Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger, and he's going to sing a song to Woody, and it just throughout the whole movie this applies. But Timothy just knew day by day, no, I'm going to be in a room with these two guys, and what happens emotionally in the scene, I got to really play. I'm not going to be lip syncing, and Timothy, because he's he had it together
Yeah.
and he's confident and he's the star, he was able to, I'm sure, get that going.
Yeah.
So what you see in the movie is the live takes that happen in a room. Yeah, everything that you said is right. Less than ideal recording conditions, but the emotional content of what goes down, I think, superseded all of that.
That's great news. That's really good to know going into the film. One last question for you, Larry. This is the big one-line one, right? If you were to sum up in one sentence, what is the most important element required for a guitar player to play like Bob Dylan?
A rough and ready, creative, one-man band, guitar as orchestra style.
That is perfect. That is absolutely perfect. Yes, attitude's everything with that guy, right?
It's funny, you hit the nail on the head on a lot of things. Like the people sort of who came after Bob, shortly after, like your Paul Simons, and I shouldn't say your Paul Simon specifically, or James Taylor. They're, as because you're a guitar, they're much more kind of elegant with the finger picking. But I would always say about Bob, wow, he's just rough and ready. He's got to be a one-man band. Not that there's not a lot of light and shade, because there is too, and there's always an interesting accompaniment. But anyway, I did get it in one sentence. So
you did, and that was perfect. Larry, it's been great. I think we've covered everything I needed to cover, and I can't wait to watch that film again. What a legend. Larry, thank you so much for your time, and all the best for the next celebrity you teach how to play the guitar.
Thanks so much, Ray. It was a pleasure spending time with you.
Thank you.